I'm standing in the middle of beautiful South Pass, Wyoming, and the story of this pass is the story of some of the earliest exploration of the American West. In 1806, when Lewis and Clark passed through, they went along the Yellowstone River at the northern part of the state of Wyoming, and they had no idea that this place existed. But this was the established route for fur trappers for several years after. But in 1812, a company led by John Jacob Astor decided that they should continue along the Yellowstone River, but there was a Crow Indian threat going on. The Crow were warriors, and so Robert Stewart basically petitioned Astor to let him gather 6 people, and they would continue south and just see what they found. Now, they could have found something much more dangerous than the Crow threat, and I think that this is something which speaks to the pioneering attitude. They headed out into the wilderness having no idea what was down here, and they discovered this. And Stewart remarked that it was basically a secret back door to the Great Basin. So by 1823, a member of William Henry Ashley's 100, Jedediah Smith, he decided to lead an expedition along this pass. And by 1832, it was being used by mountain men. It was being used by fur trappers to go from Fort Bonneville to Fort Bonnevillette. And by 1841, the Bidwell-Bartleson party passed through here, and it became cemented at that point as a point for immigrant trains. The Bidwell-Bartleson party was the first wagon train heading to California to make their way out on the West Coast. So from that point on, it became an integral part of the immigrant trail, the California Trail, and it was a crucial part to the Mormon settlement of Utah. And it all begins in 1812 when a party of men broke off from John Jacob Astor because they feared the Crow warriors to the north. And that cemented it as a vital backbone to the settlement of the West. I'm actually really excited to be passing through here because my partner and I were just up seeing some Butch Cassidy sites in Browns Park, and we just so happened to stumble across this, which I had bookmarked in the past and I really wanted to see. But it's the site of the 1825 Rocky Mountain Rendezvous. And these rendezvous would continue for decades until they finally teetered off in the 1840s and 50s. But it's said that William Ashley realized the importance of meeting the Rocky Mountain sort of mountain men out here, because every year they would have to travel all the way back to St. Louis, Missouri, drop off their furs, and at the time, Missouri was sort of the edge of Western civilization for the United States, and the West was truly wild. And it's said that in 1825, and at every subsequent Mountain Man Fair, that there were hundreds of people, specifically 800 were here, and they said that the whiskey flowed freely, and they openly admitted in their journals that more civilized societies would look upon them and think, these men are barbarians, but they would practice their survival skills, test each other's marksmanship, just go over their stories with the Native Americans, because at the time in the early 1820s, they were very friendly with the Native Americans, and a lot of these men, including Jim Bridger, who was still very green behind the ears when he came to this Rocky Mountain Festival, they were very new to the whole scene. And so 800 men, women, and children came out here, and Ashley left with $50,000 worth of furs, heading back for St. Louis. And at the time, $50,000 would make you a king out here. And it's fascinating to think of the kind of merriment that went on in 1825, back when this territory, I believe, was claimed by the Hudson's Bay Company and the American Fur Company, and the warfare was generally waged between these fur companies, and the U.S. government had very little presence out here on the plains. The first Rocky Mountain Rendezvous, which was a sort of gathering of all of these fur traders and wild men and explorers, French people, Englishmen who came down from Oregon Territory, and people who just wanted to live off the grid, as well as friendly Native Americans, happened in 1825. But they found an easier spot to meet here in 1833 at the confluence of the Horse Creek and the Green River. Very easy to go along the Green River, and then you just turn right on Horse Creek, and here you are. And there were 6 of the 16 Rocky Mountain rendezvous held along the bank right here. And by 1840, the fur trade was collapsing because they had found easier networks to obtain these furs, and they were sort of going out of style at the time. but it would be here that Jim Bridger and Kit Carson would party, and these were, by all accounts, debaucherous meetings. They lasted for up to a month. They would go through just piles of booze. They would gamble. They would go into their teepees, have sex, and then do business deals. Jim Bridger, I believe, got a Native American wife here by shooting a competitor who was abusing her, and she went over to Jim Bridger and they became lifelong partners. And it was here that the first Scottish tourist, or the first tourist of Wyoming, came through. He wrote poems about it. It wasn't just a business meeting per se. A lot of artists came through, and the earliest women to pass through here were preachers, some of the first women to make it to the American West. Over here is the confluence of the Horse Creek and the Green River, where the Rocky Mountain Rendezvous were held. And right over here, next to the sign, we have a monument to the first women along the Old Oregon Trail who were also missionaries. It was Narcissa Whitman and Eliza Hart Spalding. They came here and they were some of the first people who proselytized to the Native Americans, but the first women in the American West. And it's fascinating to think that in this town of less than 300 people nowadays, there would have been these huge meetings. And actually only a mile south of town, the first Catholic Mass in the American West, or in the state of Wyoming, was held by Father Jean de Smet, which I'll talk about in just a minute. About 2 miles up the road from where I'm standing right now is the town of Daniel, Wyoming, and it stands at the confluence of the Horse Creek and the Green River, where 6 Rocky Mountain rendezvous were held between 1833 and 1840. And it was at the last one of these rendezvous that Reverend Pierre de Smet, a missionary from Europe who had come over in 1821, gave the first Catholic Mass in what is now Wyoming. And at this Rocky Mountain rendezvous, it said that 2,000 Native Americans, along with a huge smattering of fur trappers and Rocky Mountain wild men, people who were dying off because the fur trade was collapsing, they all prostrated themselves at an altar that de Smet had made out of native stone and decorated with flowers. And this was the first time that Catholic Mass was held here, and he said that it touched his heart. And he was called amongst the Indians the sincerest friend. If you follow the road a little bit further down, overlooking the town, you have the de Smet Monument. And this was made in 1940 on the 100th anniversary of the Mass that was held here. And it's still a very beautiful place and sacred to a lot of Catholics out west. And you have to remember, too, that there weren't too many missionaries out here